In this video, I'm going to talk about conferences, both reading and writing conferences. So I'm going to start off a little bit by talking about Kathy Bomer and some of her work, specifically what she writes about in Hidden Gems, which is some of my favorite advice that I've ever read for teachers. She talks a lot about looking at students' writing and seeing the positives in it. She talks about how if we read a book from an author and we don't really understand the intent or the meaning in their work, we assume that we're the ones that are not understanding, not that they did something wrong. And I think that we should look at our students' work with that same kind of frame set. So if we're reading our students' work and we're confused or we don't get it, then we actually need to talk to them and have them explain to us what they were thinking. But every student's work, a lot of times we start as teachers, we're usually grading. So we start looking at it with the intent of what's missing, where did they mess up, or what could have been better, when in reality we need to stop and kind of look at our writers' work for things that they're already doing really well. Kids have insane imaginations. A lot of them come up with things that I could never come up with as an adult. And so just by looking at it and valuing the things that they're already doing really well, it's just going to set the intention from a much more positive place and give you the opportunity to tell them. And that should always be the start of your conference, is telling them something you notice that they are doing really well. Even in a reading conference, if you have them read to you or tell you about a book that they're reading, always starting off with that positive and kind of setting the tone that you're noticing what wonderful things they're doing. There's a quote from Portsmouth where he says, "The teacher's primary purpose is to listen to what students can teach you about the way they think and make meaning." And I think that's so important because we all have different funds of knowledge. And so just because someone interprets something or your students create something in a different way than you've seen it done before, it does not necessarily mean that it's wrong or anything like that. So just having your students explain to you why they made the decisions that they did and the strategies behind their work and their reading and their thinking, their writing, will really just take you a long way. On top of that, after starting with strengths, I think it's really important to make sure that the conference is student-led. So the student should always be leading the conversation. And my literacy professor right now, Michiko Hikita, she actually has us transcribe our conferences and look back to see the language that we're using and making sure that we're always building up our reader and writer and just paying such close attention to who's talking the most, and the kind of unintentional messages that we might be giving that might be interpreted differently than how we mean them. So I highly recommend that. I definitely learned a lot from doing that. And lastly, Porth talks a lot. A quote directly from his work says, "Discomfort is where you see the most growth." And so I think that goes back to starting off with a positive. And when you set the intent that you guys are working together, you're a team, you want to see your students succeed, and framing it when you're giving them that teaching point at the end, framing that in the sense that I think you're ready for this. I've seen your work and you've done an amazing job. I've seen this growth in you and you're ready for this next step and this is what it is. Framing it in that sense is going to keep such a positive attitude towards school and towards their learning, and really between your relationship with you and your student, to be able to nudge them to see that student growth that you are really looking for and that they are looking for. And so always ending the conference, I think, is important with one of those teaching points. Giving them something to work towards, to try out after that compliment that you've given them and that chance to explain their work, and then just nudge them forward so that they can become better readers and writers.